Yeah. Okay. So this week we are on chapter 9 to chapter 14. And these chapters were a little bit longer, so it's the same amount of material as last week, but fewer chapters overall. So in chapter 9, we have kind of a shift. We suddenly have a tutor. And this tells us a couple of things. One, George MacDonald is the person that he's talking to. So this is Lewis, we now know is this narrator, at least some version of Lewis talking to his mentor. So it's kind of a cool moment, I think, for Lewis as an author to be able to put a hero of his into the story, but he gets caught up in the fact that it's George MacDonald, and he starts to gush the way we do when we meet our heroes. The hero is able to gently redirect the conversation back into something a little more profitable by saying, I know all this already, and in fact, you've got some of the details wrong. So now we have the burning question of our narrator. Do any of them stay? Can they stay? Is any real choice offered to them? How did they come to be here? So MacDonald talks about refrigerarium, which has nothing to do with refrigeration. I'm guessing it's Latin, and I couldn't tell you. No. But the gist of it is that the damned have holidays, have excursions into hell. So obviously we're talking about hauntings where the dead can return to earth and play tricks and that kind of thing. But there seems to be the opposite of that. Some of the damned will actually go into heaven. And again, I just want to remind us that Lewis is not claiming any sort of knowledge of heaven. He's made that very clear in his preface that this is all speculation and just literary interest. Anything that you observed as you read this section that you wanted to talk about?
I think it's specific. Okay. No.
So, turn the page.
I'm not sure if it's not really heaven and it's not really hell. Is
Right.
that kind of what he?
Yes and no. So the big question here is judgment not final? Is there really a way out of hell into heaven? And so MacDonald says it depends. And so here we saw this earlier, I think, with Screw Tape. I can't remember if we talked about it a bit with Mere Christianity. This is an issue of time. Us being in time, we think of these discrete moments. This happened, and then this happened, and this happened, right? There were moments where you guys were outside the building, came into the building, sat down, right? We can we could work those back.
Yeah.
If heaven and hell are part of eternity, where discrete moments don't work the same way, right? It's more of a unity. And so I think that's where Lewis is going, to say it's not that judgment isn't final. It's not to say that people can escape hell and get into heaven. And so he says, those who choose to leave the town will not have been in hell. Those, any that leave it they can consider that to have been purgatory, right?
Mhm.
That which has
Maybe.
purified them enough to come into heaven. And so let's not call these first steps heaven necessarily. It's just, or at least not deep heaven. So again, Lewis is not trying to create a theology. He's just trying to think of this continuum. For those who step into heaven and move on to deep heaven, then this was simply the valley of the shadow of life, right? And those who stay, it will have been heaven from the first. So again, this idea that heaven and hell both work backwards, so that you will have always have been in heaven, or you will have always been in hell. And in that way, Lewis is saying it's always final, because you had never been anywhere else.
Mhm.
So again, because he's not trying to build a theology, he's going to be okay with your tension.
Yeah.
Right. This is weird. Because we do like these nice, clean categories, right?
Yeah.
Those who are going to hell are going to go to hell and stay in hell, all that kind of stuff. And he's not arguing with that. He's going to say, that's right. Those who ultimately choose hell will have always been in hell and never had the opportunity to leave hell.
Mhm.
But again, Lewis represents us, right? He saw that I looked puzzled. Presently, he spoke again. So again, we have this, the state of eternity, the door of timelessness, good and evil, full grown become retrospective. So again, it's that sense of heaven and hell working backwards, right?
Mhm.
Damnation will spread back and back into their past and contaminate the pleasure of the sin. Both processes begin even before death. Good man's past begins to change so that his forgiven sins and remembered sorrows take on the quality of heaven. The bad man's past already conforms to his badness and is filled only with dreariness. And that is why at the end of all things, when the sun rises here, then the twilight turns to blackness down there. The blessed will say, we have never lived anywhere except in heaven, and the lost, we were always in hell, and both will speak truly.
And I like this, earlier, when they are full grown, become retrospective.
Mhm.
I always think of that as like, people who come to know the Lord, like that, and we've talked about this before, like people sometimes get stuck,
Right.
right, in sort of that infancy in their faith.
Yeah.
And then there's no growth.
Yeah.
And it's an easier step backwards, I guess, if you will, whereas
Yeah.
you keep moving and maturing and getting closer,
Yes. Yeah.
fully trusting, fully your faith is
Right.
right. There's,
Yes.
you can just see the growth in someone.
Right. Yeah. You can
That's the-
stall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And the importance of going on from justification to sanctification, right?
Yeah.
To move on to glorification.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. And of course, from the perspective of the lost, it will look different and they'll talk about it differently, right? So again, this is about perspectives to some degree.
Still makes you think though, like, how did they know when the bus was coming? You know what I mean? Still
Yeah.
that, like, you're in that space.
Yeah.
How-
And I think we get a little bit of an answer to that later, right? Because there was only one who ever descended into hell. And because all moments are included in that moment, he's the one who preaches the gospel to them in hell. And
Mhm.
he's the one that ultimately is responsible for them being on the bus.
Right. Yeah.
So heaven, we should note, is real. So it's blasphemy to describe heaven as only a state of mind. That's not true. But hell ultimately is only a state of mind. Not blasphemy to say that. only because hell is a choice, right? Like it's the bent thinking that does not allow entrance into heaven ultimately.
Mhm.
But heaven is reality itself.
All that is fully real is heavenly.
Mhm. So I've talked about this before. In his book, Shake Hands with the Devil, Romeo Dallaire says, I know God is real because in Rwanda, in the genocide, I've seen the devil at work. Because the devil exists, there must be a God, which is a pretty popular way of thinking about things. We'll see that in other media. Augustine and other theologians have refuted that to say, no, God doesn't exist because the devil exists. The devil doesn't ultimately exist because God exists. Evil does not have ultimacy. Only God has ultimacy. Evil in the end will be completely done away with, won't have any real being. Only God and that which belongs to God ultimately has existence, has being. Everything else will fade away, will be, to use biblical language, burned up, right? And only that which is precious, good metal, becomes refined, but the straw, the stubble, the hay, that gets burnt up and destroyed, right? That makes sense?
Yeah.
So heaven, God, that which belongs to God is ultimate. Evil, its derivation, it's representative in Satan. Those who would reject God and curse God ultimately do not have reality. They do not have being. And so that's echoed here, right? All that is real is heaven. Ultimately, hell is not real. But we're not here for the curiosities. Trying to figure out all of this.
It's interesting of C.S. Lewis that kind of follows through, like he was such an articulate thinker.
Mhm.
And yet he was more comfortable with limits to thought or limits to knowing, or it seemed like he was more comfortable than often I hear people that this is maybe unknowable or hard for us to wrap our heads around, or
Mhm.
past where I can get to, or
Yeah,
it seems like he's very comfortable with that. And
yeah,
it seems at odds with the very, I'd say often in the church, more certainty. If I'm a good thinker, I'm certain on all my answers.
yeah, yeah.
In some cases.
Um, I think Lewis, and I think we saw it with Mere Christianity as well, right? He wanted to talk about the things that we can all agree on. And because there's such a diversity around, let's say, revelation, the eschaton, life after death, I think Lewis, has some thoughts and he's putting them down. But at the end of the day, he doesn't want to divide the church. And so, I mean, even here, both Catholics and Protestants are represented, right? In these words, I think my readers are going to have a hard time at this, right?
Yeah.
Well, don't even worry about it. Like, that's not what we're really here for. You think about it a little bit, talk about it a little bit, but so I think he's not interested in causing division. I don't think he's interested in building those castles. I think he's far more, when there's agreement across the board, he's happy to say, yeah, this is a core doctrine. And we have to all agree on this. And so I'm going to take a crack at articulating the way I understand the doctrine of the Trinity, or Christ being fully God, fully man. These are essential things that nobody in Orthodox Christianity can argue about or does argue about. It defines orthodoxy. Whereas an idea about life after death, well, we have some range on how we think about these things. And so I think he's holding it with an open hand for sure. Yeah.
I think he's living out that curiosity and that openness
Yeah.
where heaven's at, right? Whereas we so often our mindset is, well, it's got to be in a box,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
where we get trapped. That whole idea of Laird's saying, like,
Yeah.
if that's all you saw.
Yeah.
That's the box you saw was just evil, then you wouldn't
Yeah,
be curious to know that there is hope,
right.
there is love.
Yeah, yeah,
In even the most evil person, there
Yeah.
could be the
Yeah.
possibility and being
Yeah.
curious.
yeah, for sure. So ultimately, those who return, their slogan is better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And so, in some ways, what we are going to see playing out in the rest of these chapters is that those who choose hell because they have their rights, they have their authority, their desires, and they won't let them go. So joy is reality, heaven is reality, so heaven is joy. And so rather than joy, rather than heaven, rather than reality, they want to go back to their own mental, again, hell is a state of mind, right? Their own way of thinking about things, which we call the sulks in kids, but we have much more refined names in adults. Self-respect, injured merit, tragic greatness, proper pride. And so now we're getting a little more heady. We're kind of discussing some philosophical things, right? Sensuality, a worse sin, or is there other sins that are worse? We have some examples to help us understand. So a type of person that gets so caught up in survival, their whole life is around survival. When they get to heaven and everyone has therefore survived, there's no more doom to fear. They have nothing, right? And rather than seeing the joke in that, rather than, right, remember I talked about last week, shame the devil by laughing at him, rather than laughing at ourselves, right? They have to go to where they can hold on to that thing. And of course, we have this moment where Lewis has a little bit of a autobiographical moment, right? Because his teacher says, it is nearer to such as you than you think, Mr. Lewis. There have been men before now who got so interested in proving the existence of God that they came to care nothing for God himself, as if the good Lord. So Lewis is an apologist, can get so caught up in defending the faith that becomes your reason for being. People so occupied in spreading Christianity, they don't give a thought to Christ. Lovers of books who stop reading them. That one struck home. Moved by a desire to change the subject, I asked why the solid peoples.
It is always such a good reminder of, like, I mean, Christ kept it pretty simple,
Right,
and we like to overcomplicate it
right.
to make
Yeah,
ourselves
yeah.
either busy or smart or
Yes.
whatever, purposeful.
Yeah.
And I mean, really, like, love.
And this is kind of the flip side of screw tape, right? As Lewis talks about in screw tape, that the devil always comes at us in pairs, right? We always have to fight two devils at any one time. So this is like the converse, is being put in more positive terms, but we always have to be careful, right? Because we think when we're defending Christianity or spreading Christianity or defending the faith, that we are combating the devil. But then we're pulling, he's pushing, right? It's that judo move to, okay, now you're so committed to apologetics or missions that you've lost the lover in the midst of it. Hmm? So everyone who wishes gets on the bus, never fear. In the end, there are only two kinds of people. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done. All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. No soul that seriously and constantly desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek find, those who knock, it is opened. And now we're interrupted by a ghost talking a blue streak.
Are we supposed to know some of these people? Like,
I think you're supposed to recognize the characters in your own life.
okay,
Somebody that, is
Yeah.
this type of woman. Now, again, he's writing in the 50s and 60s. And again, we've talked about 46. We've talked about, there's a small streak of sexism.
Right.
But I mean, this could be a closer picture to the kind of women that Lewis knew in his day and in his country than we're used to. So,
Mhm.
so I think we're supposed to recognize the character, but not necessarily the person. And so really, this is just a silly, selfish woman. But Lewis is troubled and he's got his teacher here. So he says, well, this just doesn't seem to be the sort of soul that ought to be even in danger of damnation. She isn't wicked. She's only silly, gregarious old woman who has got into a habit of grumbling. And so, so we hear this distinction. The question is whether she is now a grumbler. I wouldn't have thought there's a doubt about that. No, you misunderstand me. Is she a grumbler? She's still an agent, an actor, or is she merely now only a grumble? Is there a real woman, even a little trace of one inside the grumbling that can be brought to life again? And so this example of blowing small ember into a flame. If there's even one wee spark under all those ashes, we'll blow it till the whole pile is red and clear. But if there's nothing but ashes, we'll not go on blowing them in our own eyes forever. They must be swept up. And so understanding that somebody can become in their being a grumble without being a grumbler is that hell is almost nothing. And then he kind of talks about, we've all been there, where we can put ourselves in that mood and we can pull ourselves out of it. We can reflect on it. We can, I'm being stupid for behaving this way. And there's that person there. But at some point, we can just become that thing. And we have the ghost that thinks that she can do a flirtation and attract the bright people. And because they will not respond to her ghastly flirtation, she calls them stupid and gets back on the bus. There are those. So we're still having this conversation about why doesn't hell or heaven invade hell? And we talk about this desire of those in hell to extend hell, to bring it bodily into heaven if they could. Then there's those who come just to gibber at the eternal dawn. And then we have another little scene coming here. An artist wants to paint heaven. So there's this, again, that sense of you're missing it. You can't want, the same way that you can't want God as a means to it, and you can't want heaven as just an object to paint. To want heaven itself, you have to enjoy heaven itself. And so it's not the desire to paint, it's not that art is lost, it's that it like everything else needs to be transformed, right? A different end.
These are good. That's sort of that same reminder again, back to like, you got lost in the thing.
Mhm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Seems the book reader and the apostle.
Yeah. And as we go on, it's not just that, right? It's well, in the next chapter, chapter 10, I've titled that "Others Cannot Give You Substance in Heaven," right? So we have this woman who has found out that her husband, who passed first, is in heaven. And so we have this interesting conversation. I'm ready to forgive Robert. I forgive him as a Christian. But wait a minute, if you forgive him, how can you resent him being in heaven? Yeah, there are some things we can never forget.
A nice little qualification on forgiving.
Right,
Mhm.
yeah. Right, what do we actually mean when we talk about forgiving, right?
Yeah.
And then we have this description. What did you think of her, the way that she wifed her husband, Robert?
She was very sacrificial in her mind.
Right, yes.
But to be a martyr.
It's like lifting a sack of coal.
Mm-hmm.
Beg him.
So she has spent a lifetime making something of Robert.
Yeah.
Very much
Okay.
against Robert's will and
Poor
wishes. Now, we might also evaluate Robert in all of this. I mean, I don't think he's without blame in this scenario. But she certainly had an agenda. She had a plan. And she really wanted him to follow along with it. And he didn't. So initially, she has no interest in being in the place with Robert, but then after rehearsing the whole affair, she has this moment where she says, give him to me. If I'm given a free hand, I'll take charge of him again. I will take up my burden once more. With all the time one would have here, I believe I could still make something of him. He's not fit to be on his own. Put me in charge of him. He wants firm handling. I know him better than you do. Don't consult him. Just give him to me. There's lots of things I still want to do with him.
Like a project.
I'm miserable. I must have someone to do things to. No one minds about me at all. I can't alter them. It's dreadful to see them all sitting about and not be able to do anything with them. Give him back to me. Why should everything be his own way? It isn't right. It's not fair. How can I pay him out if you won't let me have him?
What does she mean by that? How can I pay him out?
Revenge.
Oh. Hmm.
What did Robert do so bad?
That's not a bad question.
Yeah.
You haven't read that chapter, have you?
No.
So Robert seems to have wanted a simple life. Marry this woman, enjoy time with her, time with his friends. But she wouldn't have that, made him take on extra work, take on promotions.
Exercise.
She got rid of his friends, got him the right kind of friends that would benefit him, and made him buy a house that they couldn't really afford, bigger house and more parties and friends. And he just continued to move inward until she was alone, and then he finally died. And he hated her by the end. He just hated her.
Just want to work a simple job and go to the pub and watch football
Yeah.
like a good old Englishman.
So in the end, she powered up like a dying candle flame, snapped suddenly. A sour, dry smell lingered in the air for a moment, and then there was no ghost to be seen.
Hmm.
So this is kind of like the grumbler, right? There's nothing left of the woman at that point. There's only that desire to consume somebody else,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And again, that idea of I've forgiven him. If you won't give him to me, how can I pay him out? And the pay him out is for all eternity. How can I make his heaven into hell, right? And again, you can't bring hell into heaven.
Not a spark of love left.
Right. Right. And he's completely, I mean, again, this is the completion of that movement, right? One would assume at some point when they first were together and married, there was love. There was desire to do life together, and they just kept going separate until
Mhm.
he now becomes a means to her end, somebody that I can alter, right? So he continues to be an object and not a person.
Mhm. She definitely had a hole that was just never being filled.
Mhm.
But then he didn't really help himself or her out by saying, no,
No,
I'm not your project. I'm not gonna fill you."
yes, yeah. Yeah, he probably passive aggressive, right?
Mhm.
He takes a job. Hopefully now you'll finally be happy, right? Just
Mhm.
kind of a snide comment. Sitting there hating her.
Mhm.
So,
Rather than coming alongside and saying, what is it that will make you happy?
yeah.
How can you grow?
Well, and even standing up for himself and saying no,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? Like negotiating, navigating.
Putting the mirror up.
Yeah, yeah.
Scott, this is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, divorce would even be better than that, right?
Mhm.
Not that I'm advocating for divorce,
No.
just
Mhm.
at least there's two real people there fighting for something, right? They're
Mhm.
actors, again, it's a story, so.
Sure.
But yeah,
Mm.
I want to be careful that we use all the brushes in the in the box here.
Mhm.
But then we have chapter 11. Oh, this is a hard one. So I entitled this Fallen and Risen Love. Now we have a woman ghost meeting a bright spirit named Reginald. It's you, is it? Well, she would have thought it would have been Michael, not her brother Reginald, that come to meet her. Of course, he's here. Oh, yes, he's far up in the mountains. Would have been no good for Michael to have come, not yet. Because Michael wouldn't have been able to see or hear his mother at the present moment, because she would be invisible to Michael. But there's hope because we can build you up. And she can hardly believe that. And she's ready to take offense at anything Reginald has to say. And so she asks a key question for her: when will I be allowed to see him? Well, there's no question of being allowed. As soon as it's possible for him to see you, that's really what needs to happen. Of course, he will, but you need to be thickened up. And the first step is a hard one. The first step is you have to learn to want someone else in capital letters. Don't say more than Michael, but somebody else besides Michael. But you have to have at least the germ of a desire for God to start the process of becoming a real person. And again, if heaven is the only reality, that is, heaven is God's sphere of reality, right? So heaven is God's life. Then to become a real person, one must have God in them, a desire for God. Which of course she just hears as religion, hardly the moment here in heaven, and from you of all people. But that's fine. I'll do whatever I need to do. Sooner I begin, sooner I get to see my boy. Go ahead, I'm ready. On again, can't work that way. You cannot use God as a means to get to Michael. The whole thickening treatment consists in learning to want God for his own sake. And then this is the key to her problem. Well, you wouldn't talk that way if you were a mother. You mean if I were only a mother? But there's actually no such thing as being only a mother. You exist as Michael's mother only because you first exist as God's creature. So there's this more fundamental relationship. It's older and it's closer. God also loves. God has also suffered. God has also waited a long time. She's having none of that. If God loved me, he would let me see my boy. If he loved me, why did he take Michael away from me? Well, in part, he had to take Michael away for Michael's sake. Well, she's given up her whole life to make Michael happy. Well, human beings can't make one another really happy for long. The other reason why he took Michael away was for her own sake. He wanted that instinctive love for her child to turn into something better. So again, we're back to mere Christianity there. There's the herd instinct, and then there's that thing outside of the herd instinct, which distinguishes between two merely animal instincts that says this is better. So it's this desire to have this instinct of love to be something better. He wanted you to love Michael as he understands love. You can't love a fellow creature fully until you love God. And in her case, there wasn't a chance while Michael's was still there for her to learn that love of God. So this was a case for surgery. In the hopes that in the loneliness of the loss of her son, in the silence, something else besides that instinct of love for her son would grow. Of course, mother love is put on a pedestal.
Holiest of feelings.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
No natural feelings are high or low, holy or unholy in themselves. They are all holy when God's hand is on the rein. They all go bad when they set up on their own and make themselves into false gods.
Or like the reverse, like in Les Mis, towards the end, there's that line, to love another person is to see the face of God.
Hmm.
This is sort of like reverse. To love God is to see another person. Being kind of like the one can grow into one, or it can turn the other direction.
And again, I think we probably need to, Lewis is a Greek scholar. And so he's written a book called The Four Loves, right? And so in some ways, it really depends what we're talking about as love. Because where we get to in this, as Lewis and MacDonald have a conversation, is that she doesn't actually love her son, right? She had her way, she would take Michael from heaven and bring him with her into hell,
Mhm.
right? So this is love that has gone wrong. So she's not really loving another human being.
No.
She's using the word and she's not doing the action. So I'm thinking that in Les Mis,
Yeah, you're right.
That's different.
that there's this, quantitatively something different going on.
Is that a
Um,
sacrificial love? Like that was,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In that case, when he's dying
Yeah.
or whatever, it says that.
This case, she'd sacrifice the object of her love for herself. To
Right.
fulfill a need for
Yeah.
her.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all
Messed
very
up.
selfish and it's bent. She's made her son and her feelings for her son into an idol, right?
Because her daughter and her husband, that's not even a.
Right.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And
That
God is
love.
nowhere
No,
on the in the scheme of things here, right?
I'm curious to know the backstory. You know what I mean? What
Mhm.
was it that? Like in sort of a warped sense, I worked with a family. And it seemed like there was this one son that we'd have this conversation around that was
Mm.
always on a pedestal,
Right.
but it was so blatant
Yes.
that the other son was not being paid attention to,
Mm.
had all the same symptoms.
Yeah.
And the husband could see it and he was super sacrificial, would do everything, but this mother could not.
Yeah.
You know, so you have the backstory
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, how did
Yeah.
we get her to a place of like acknowledging her other people and
Yes.
taking care of herself?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
To be a better mom, you got to take care of you.
Yeah.
But in here, you kind of wonder, like, what is the backstory of her warped sense of
Yeah.
idolizing her son,
Yep.
right?
It happens. I mean, there's
Sure.
the story of Ordinary People. I don't know if you're
Mhm.
familiar with that. It was made into a movie years ago. It was a book I read in high school. I liked it. But it's basically following one son whose older brother died, saving his life. And it's this fractured family now trying to recover. So he's wanting to die. He tried to kill himself. And so it's picks up after his suicide attempt, and he has to go to a doctor, a therapist, and then the mother really hates him and deep down wishes the other son had lived and he had died. And then the father trying to hold this all together. And it's a great book, good movie. Yeah. So, yeah, not only did she just love her son, but she continued, right? She embalmed that. So it becomes this mummified thing. And she's being offered God. And so this keep coming back to, this is in some ways, he's addressing some of the language that we use, right? Not my own son born out of my own body. Where's your body now? Like, it's not your own body. What's his name? Dallas Willard makes this point. We don't belong to ourselves. These bodies don't belong to us, right? We belong to God. But we lose sight of that. Even to the point where Michael was an accident originally. So she's not hopeless. And again, Lewis is not here consigning anybody into hell. So with a lot of these, we kind of walk away and there's just this note of potential hope. There are those that are blowing on whatever embers might be there. We don't necessarily need to see it. What we do need to do is have this mirror held up to us again and again, right? Maybe we don't see ourselves in the artist who wants to get into heaven to paint, but maybe we see ourselves in the mother with the son. Maybe we see ourselves in the cleric with the broad views about heaven and hell and religion. Maybe, And then there's this question, well, do I go back and tell people this? No, it's not. It's not your job. But you and I must be clear, there is but one good, that is God. Everything else is good when it looks to him and bad when it turns from him. And the higher and the mightier it is in the natural order, so mother's love for her son, the more demoniac it will be if it rebels. It's not out of bad mice or bad fleas you make demons, but out of bad archangels. The false religion of lust is baser than the false religion of mother love or patriotism or art, but lust is less likely to be made into a religion. So because a mother's love is closer to godlikeness than pornography, it has a greater potential for being set up in the place of God than pornography ever would be.
Because
Sorry.
it's sometimes a very in a very stereotypical, like God, family, and freedom.
Right.
You kind of is that mix, and is God really worshipped, or is he just sort of the means that fits in that makes the family and freedom,
Right.
in your perspective, in that individual's perspective, really work?
Right.
So was it really God? Or think of that conversation with niece and nephew, they're young, figuring things out, but it's sort of well, if I believe God, then these other things will work for me.
Well,
And then life will kind of work. And is it a love for God, or was it you kind of looked at the puzzle pieces of when I want these things, and God seems to kind of work to get there?
So God secures my right to these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we can certainly use God.
You're right, things like family and stuff, nobody would shame somebody for saying that they value
Mhm,
family or togetherness or.
mhm.
But sometimes you just have to leave family if you're gonna seek God, like,
Right,
right?
yeah,
Jesus had to leave
Yeah,
his
yeah.
hometown,
yeah.
like,
Well, and you don't hate your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your wife, your son, and even your own self, you cannot be my disciple.
mhm. Goes against what society would say.
Yeah, yeah, yes, yes, yes.
But I always come back to just that same example of Christ stepping away from everybody, and spending time
Mhm,
with God.
Yeah.
Like over and over and over again. And that
right,
really feels like an uncomfortable, scary space at times to
Mm.
sit with yourself and not be distracted by all the things that
right,
seem really important
right.
and
Yeah,
good.
oh, yeah.
But like that reflective, quiet, I need to practice hearing his voice.
Mhm.
It's not something like we do not encourage that in our society, have that white space in our calendars
Oh, yeah,
to
yeah,
just sit and reflect,
yeah, yeah.
right? Like,
And it's active, because I would argue what that is that Jesus is doing is he's so in the baptism of Jesus, you have him come out of the waters, heaven is torn open, the spirit descends on him bodily as a dove and comes to rest. And the voice from heaven says, "You are my son, whom I love, my beloved. In you I am well pleased." So that's Psalm 2, and that's Isaiah, I think 46. And so we have this identity, right? This is the suffering servant, the Messiah. So we have the identity of sonship and the call, the nature of the mission for him. And so every time Jesus pulls over and he goes into solitude, so we have this healing ministry in Capernaum that is just on fire. And so he spends the night and then he goes in the early morning to retreat. That is him having that identity reinscribed on him, right? You are my son, and this is the nature of what you're doing, because the temptation is always there to get caught up, to turn this into a healing ministry rather than continue on the road towards Jerusalem and the cross, right? Because this is popular. So it's the same temptation as Jesus in the wilderness, right? If you'll only bow down to me, you can have all of this, right? If you are the Son of God, then turn these stones into bread, right? It's this call into question your identity. So that is Satan's temptation all the way through. And it's Jesus every time he retreats. It's to hear the voice of the Father once again say, "You are my son, whom I'm loved, and you I am well pleased." So it's the same for us, right? That
Mhm.
need for that time to pull over and sit silently. You are co-heir with Christ,
mhm,
heirs of God. If
mhm,
you suffer with him, then you will be glorified with him.
mhm.
Yeah.
That's such a good reminder.
So it's key. Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah. Because there's always the clamor of voices to say, you could do it another way that isn't as costly. This is
mhm.
really, could be easier, could be a lot nicer.
And some of that time, you see the increase of anxiety,
Mhm,
even people in the church,
mhm.
because there's so much noise.
Yes. Yes.
But it doesn't feel like we were talking about that tonight. It's even people feel like they almost need permission
Mhm.
in society to take
Yes.
the time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, take the
Yeah.
time, sit, close your door. It's
Yeah.
okay. Take 15 minutes,
Yeah.
take half an hour over your
Yeah.
lunch break.
Yeah.
Do what you need to do.
Yes.
But it's like, I mean, well, Sarah would know, like as a teacher, like when do you have time in your day?
Yeah.
When I want to scream,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But for somebody to come along and say, just close your door for 10
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
And be able to do that. But
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, and busyness is one of those marks of status, right? You wouldn't say to somebody, "Oh, I'm so busy." You wouldn't say to somebody, "Oh, got lots of space." I
Mhm.
take a good 15, 20 minutes to just sit quietly and reflect.
But yeah, when someone walks into a room and has that reflective, calmer nature, people are drawn to that.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's an ease and
Yeah,
a
yeah.
calmness that just kind of, even if they're not, right? They don't share how busy they are, but you are drawn, like there's a comfort. You're an anchor.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
It's interesting how it kind of works,
Yeah.
but yet we don't bring
yeah,
it.
yeah, yes. And then they run the risk of being grabbed onto like a life preserver.
Boundaries.
I'm drowning, save me.
Yes.
Well, and we have one of my favorite little scenes. Of this man with a little lizard
Yes.
on his shoulder, whispering things in his ear. We find out a little later that it's inappropriate, sensual things in his ear. And we have this angel that comes. And says, "Are you leaving?" And he says, "Oh yeah, this guy won't stop, and he won't, it's inappropriate for him to be here. I thought if he could be quiet, I could come, but he won't be quiet, so I'm gonna go home." The angel says, "I tell you, because this is a wonderful scene. Would you like me to make him quiet?" "Of course I would," said the ghost. "Then I will kill him." Problem is, the angel is burning the ghost as he gets close because he's this flaming spirit. "Don't you want him killed?" He didn't say anything about killing him at first. I hardly meant to bother you with anything so drastic as that. It's the only way. Shall I kill it? And his hands are very close to the lizard. So he's not sure about that. He really just wanted to be quiet because it's embarrassing. "Oh, may I kill it?" "Well, there's time to discuss that later. There's no time. May I kill it?" And then he says, "No, well, look, it's already gone to sleep on its own accord. It'll be all right now. Thanks so much. May I kill it?" "Don't think there's the slightest necessity for that. I should be able to keep it in order now. The gradual process would be far better than killing it. The gradual process is of no use at all. In fact, I'd let you kill it now, but as a matter of fact, I'm not feeling well today. It would be silly to do it now. So, I need good health for the operation another day. There is no other day. All days are present now. How can I tell you to kill it? You'd kill me if you did. It is not so. You're hurting me now. I never said it wouldn't hurt you. I said it wouldn't kill you. You think I'm a coward. It isn't that. Let me go check with my doctor and I'll come back the minute I can. This moment contains all moments. Why are you torturing me? You're jeering at me. How can I let you tear me in pieces? If you wanted to help me, why didn't you kill the damn thing without asking me before? I knew it would be all over by now if you had. I can't kill it against your will. It's impossible. Have I your permission?" The lizard now tries to save itself. "Be careful. He can do what he says. He can kill me. One fatal word from you and he will. Then you'll be without me forever and ever. It's not natural. How could you live? You'd only be a sort of ghost, not a real man as you are now." He doesn't understand. He's only a cold, bloodless, abstract thing. It may be natural for him, but it isn't for us. I know there's no real pleasures now, any dreams, but aren't they better than nothing? And I'll be good. I admit I've sometimes gone too far in the past, but I promise I won't do it again. I'll give you nothing but really nice dreams, all sweet and fresh and almost innocent. Have I your permission?" said the angel. "I know it will kill me. It won't, but supposing it did, you're right. It would be better to be dead than to live with this creature. Then I may. Damn and blast you. Go on. Can't you get it over? Do what you like. God help me. God help me." The next moment, the ghost gave a scream of agony, such as I have never heard on earth. The burning one closed his crimson grip on the reptile, twisted it while it bit and writhed and then flung it broken back on the turf. For a moment, I can make out nothing distinctly, and I saw between me and the nearest bush unmistakably solid, but growing every moment solider, the upper arm and the shoulder of a man. Then brighter still and stronger the legs and hands, the neck and golden head materialized while I watched, and if my attention had not wavered, I should have seen the actual completing of a man, an immense man, naked, not much smaller than the angel. What distracted me was the fact that at the same moment something seemed to be happening to the lizard. At first I thought the operation had failed. So far from dying, the creature was still struggling and even growing bigger as it struggled. And as it grew, it changed. Its hinder parts grew rounder, the tail, still flickering, became a tail of hair that flickered between huge and glossy buttocks. Suddenly, I started back, rubbing my eyes. What stood before me was the greatest stallion that I had ever seen, silvery white, but with mane and tail of gold. It was smooth and shining, rippled with swells of flesh and muscle, whinnying and stamping with its hooves. At each stamp, the land shook, the trees dindled. There's that word again.
Yeah.
And then the man mounts the horse and they ride off into the mountains, scaling them faster and faster as they go. And then you have all of nature singing out a song.
Mhm.
What do you think of that?
I like that imagery.
Just a small moment of faith.
Mm-hmm. And desperation.
And desperation.
God help me. God help me.
Yeah.
I can't live with this thing anymore. And you're right. If it's going to kill me, then it'd be better to die
Mhm.
than to go on living like this.
Mm.
And so this goes back to the preface, right? Lewis says there, that oh, where it is. I believe, to be sure, that any man who reaches heaven will find that what he abandoned has not been lost, that the kernel of what he was really seeking, even in his most depraved wishes, dreams, will be there beyond expectation, waiting for him in the high countries. So this little thing, fantasies, wicked little dreams, sensuality, when cast down, allowed to be broken, killed, is able to rise up, and whatever was good within that is transformed and is kept, right? It is actually becomes the vehicle that propels him further into heaven. So we don't know, what can that sensuality become? But I think it's an interesting notion, right? These things that we have to let go of, in some ways we're afraid. Sin is we fear that we cannot trust God. I mean, that at the heart is what sin is, right? We are afraid God is not good, that he's keeping stuff from us, and so we are choosing other goods beside him. But when we have God, then we have all other goods with
Mhm.
God.
Yeah, I love that imagery of him creating the stallion out of
Mm-hmm.
the creature.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought of it that way. I always thought like you want to get rid of that voice or whatever it is. Not that it would go with you
Right.
necessarily, but when you hear it this way,
Mm-hmm.
then I could. Yeah, it's hopeful.
Yeah. So nothing, not even the best and the noblest, can go on as it is now. Nothing, not even what is lowest and most bestial, will not be raised again if it submits to death, right? So he submitted it to death. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. Flesh and blood cannot come to the mountains, not because they are too rank, but because they are too weak. What is a lizard compared with a stallion? Lust is a poor, weak, whimpering, whispering thing compared with that richness and energy of desire, which will arise when lust has been killed. So lust is the pale, sickly imitator of true desire. I suppose true desire desires what is real, which is God.
Was it not C.S. Lewis playing in mud puddles when the ocean is
Yeah,
close
that was
by?
mere Christianity. Yeah.
Mere Christianity,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
So a similar kind of idea.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Very good.
Kind of reminds me too of like even Marin's friend. You know, like those voices that just plague some,
Mhm,
and she lost a friend in fall, and
mhm.
in her note it said that she desired home. And so Marin blogged about that, just the idea of, right, just that desperation. She chose a different route, but
Yeah.
she just wanted that.
Yeah.
Something bigger.
Yeah.
I'm stuck in this. I want something bigger.
Yeah.
And not knowing Christ, like for all we know, not having from a Christian home, but just that desire inside, knowing that there's something more
Mhm,
out there,
mhm.
and that this voice isn't the only voice.
That's similar to Augustine, right? Our hearts are restless until they find rest in thee, O Lord.
Hmm.
Well, we have chapter 12, which I call hiding our face. Oh, yeah, this is the dwarf.
They
Yes,
attached or something, this one?
yeah, with the tragedy and
Or hold up.
it's an odd little thing.
Mhm.
Um, two phantoms, tall ghost, horribly thin and shaky, who seem to be leading on a chain another ghost no bigger than an organ grinder's monkey. And then he realizes that it's in fact not that way. She's actually addressing the dwarf, ignoring the thing on the chain. And so her love, the woman's love, gives this dwarf a little more substance. And he doesn't speak directly, he speaks through the tragedian. And it's in this very dramatic kind of dialogue. And again, we have this desire to misunderstand. She doesn't answer his direct question, you missed me. So they jump on that. She doesn't answer our question. She wants this forgotten. This is somebody who wants to be miserable, to hang on to their misery. So is looking for these excuses to be offended.
There is some joy in him because the light starts to brighten.
Right. So she is somebody that, again, we have this discussion about love, right? You mean you didn't love me truly then? She says, well, only in a poor sort of way. I've asked you to forgive me. There was a little real love in it, but what we call love down there was mostly the craving to be loved. In the main, I loved you for my own sake because I needed you. So she recognizes that in her life, there's a certain selfishness to our love. But in heaven, that selfishness is removed. There's only this true love. So she's saying, I love you now, as I should have loved you then. But of course, he just hangs on to that. So she doesn't need him because she has all that she needs in the one who made her. And it's because she has no need for him that she can now love him without the kind of twisted love that was based in our own need earlier.
Mm.
Of course, again, the tragedy and says she needs me no more, no more. Would to God that I had seen her lying dead at my feet before I heard these words, lying dead at my feet. And so she tries to reach him, as so many of the bright people do. You're talking nonsense. And for a moment, the dwarf seems to see the joke in it all. Her laughter was past his defenses. He was struggling. So that takes us into chapter 13, where it all reverses and the dwarf quickly starts to shrink and fade, and just the tragedian remains, and she recognizes him not. And so then there's this discussion about pity, using pity, other people's pity in the wrong way. We've all done it on earth a bit. Pity was meant to be a spur that drives joy to help misery, but it can be used the wrong way around. It can be used for a kind of blackmailing. Those who choose misery can hold joy up to ransom by pity. Even as a child, you did it. Instead of saying you were sorry, you went and sulked in the attic because you knew that sooner or later one of your sisters would say, I can't bear to think of him sitting up there alone crying. And so their pity, you used their pity to blackmail them, and they gave in the end. So it's this moment to stop. So again, it's a reflection of what she admitted about herself. I loved you because I needed to be loved.
Mhm.
Is this consuming? But you can't hold up joy here. You can't blackmail. You can't be miserable. You can't hang on to that misery. And so she does not recognize him. If it were possible, I would go down with you into hell, but you cannot bring hell into me.
Mhm.
And she finally says, I cannot love a lie. I cannot love the thing which is not. I am in love, and I will not go out of it. And so, like the other woman, the tragedian vanishes, and away she goes. And again, we have the song of heaven singing over her. Then we have the moment of Lewis reflecting, right? Should we feel okay about this? Should she have been, to some degree, driven by his self-made misery. So we're forced with a hard choice. Well, would you rather he had the power of tormenting her? No, I don't want that. So what is it that you want then? What lurks behind that idea? The demand of the loveless and the self-imprisoned, that they should be allowed to blackmail the universe. That till they consent to be happy on their own terms, no one else shall taste joy. That theirs should be the final power, that hell should be able to veto heaven. It has to be one way or the other. Either the day must come when joy prevails, then all the makers of misery are no longer able to infect it, or else forever and ever the makers of misery can destroy in others the happiness they reject for themselves. I know it has a grand sound to say you'll accept no salvation which leaves even one creature in the dark outside. But watch that sophistry, or you'll make a dog in a manger the tyrant of the universe. So pities can be a weapon, can be weaponized. So the action of pity will live, but the passion of pity will die.
Sort of a tough and a messy, like mixed with charity and stuff, as I think of like, we live in a world where people are hurt, have been harmed, but hasn't treated everyone fairly.
Yep.
But this can all get kind of mixed into that, and what should be, and justice and charity and pity can look like each other at moments.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So in the kind of Arthurian literature, pity was always dangerous, right? Passion can lead us astray, right? So in that book series that I talked about before, the Sword of Truth series, the wizard's second rule, something like reason has to rule passion. Because pity can launch us off in the wrong direction because we haven't actually investigated and found out what is the truth. We're just reacting, we're not acting. So it's corruptible. So it's not that it doesn't have a proper place, right? To do justice. But pity cannot be the basis for justice. Rightness has to be the basis for justice.
So it's kind of puzzling through and figuring out the why for the reason versus pity and going, I'm gonna pour on what I think is best.
Right.
Figuring out the why for
Yeah.
their circumstances or whichever,
That's right.
and targeting that.
Yeah. It's knowledge. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then we have this neat little scene where they're talking about the vastness of hell. And the teacher gets down on his hands and knees, takes a little blade of grass, gets close to the earth, to a crack in the soil so small that I couldn't have identified it without his aid. He says, I can't be certain that this is the crack you came up through, but through a crack no bigger than that, you certainly came.
That's great imagery.
Mhm.
My favorite part.
Yeah. All hell is smaller than one pebble of your earthly world. But it is smaller than one atom of this world, the real world. Look at yon butterfly. If it swallowed all hell, how would that be big enough to do it any harm or to have any taste? Well, it seems big enough when you're in it, sir. All loneliness, angers, hatreds, envies, itchings that it contains, if rolled into one single experience and put into the scale against the least moment of joy that is felt by the least in heaven, would have no weight that could register at all. Bad cannot succeed, even in being bad, as truly as good is good. So she couldn't fit into hell. Hell could not open its mouth wide enough. For a damned soul is nearly nothing. It is shrunk, shut up in itself. Good beats upon the damned incessantly as sound waves beat on the ears of the deaf, but they cannot receive it. Their fists are clenched, their teeth are clenched, their eyes fast shut. They will not, in the end, they cannot open their hands for gifts, or their mouth for food, or their eyes to see. And who can ever reach them? Well, only the greatest of all can make himself small enough to enter hell. Only one has descended into hell. He did it for all time. Well, let's stop it there. We have kind of a scene, and then we have the sunrise come.
And again, he kind of reinforces that same, like our understanding of time doesn't match up. So you're asking questions that aren't really
Yeah.
answerable because your concept will,
Yeah.
your understanding of time will change.
Yeah, yeah. And what exactly is happening here on this chessboard? And yeah. Far more important is the breaking of the sun, and I've been caught by the morning, and I'm a ghost. Right. So we kind of echoed the Isaiah 6. Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and I have seen the Lord of hosts. All right. I'll just stop the recording.